speaks for the communities of open data. We will speak Russian because some of the speakers, it's much easier to speak Russian. I hope it's not a problem. That's why I'd like to invite the participants of the next panel discussion. I'd like to invite Ihor Toichkin. Ihor is responsible for the development of the innovative projects in OTP Bank. Please, a round of applause for him. Also, I'd like to invite Tetyana Pashyna. Tetyana deals with the forensic, and she is the senior specialist of the Deloitte company. And Sergiy Milman, who's the representative of the service which is widely known for everyone who deals with open data in Ukraine, that is YouControl. As now we are not speaking about the state sector directly, but we will speak about the business. We will speak about how the data can have a certain significance for the users, for the businesses. I'm offering to create the informal discussion for us to be honest, speaking about how open data is used in Ukraine, because we know it's being opened. I began to deal with open data in 2013, and since that lots of things happened. You know, they were having the portal emerging, the legislation base, and then the question is, who needs that? So we need to discuss that now. I'd offer to begin with the phrase of Sergiy Milman. Sergiy, I got to know, though it may seem weird, from the Ministry of Justice, which told that they are cooperating with your platform for a long time, and it seems to me that the law about open data was at its rise. It was the weak regulated sphere. Can you tell us, how did you join this sphere and how the situation changed with the usage of these data before the law and after it was adopted? Then in short, I'll tell you, maybe somebody doesn't know that YouControl is the system which gains the whole dossier about each company in the real time and operates the open state registers to create this dossier. As for our cooperation with the Ministry of Justice, well, in fact, it's still not working because since February we can't get the API, which is, as far as I know, other companies get. And we can't get any explanations, clear understanding why we can't get it. I began our acquaintance with them because I was involved into the business intelligence, and I wanted to get acquainted with all of the state officials. I tried to tell them about the importance, so I spent several months for that. I was very nervous after each of these meetings. I had nervous breakdowns. I understood this is the wrong way for me, and it was easier for me to create the quality team of programmers and to find this data in open access than to find some cooperation with them. So my history of cooperation with state officials is more negative one. As for the changes which emerged after the adoption of the law, but the principles, and it happened around this time. Well, the law was adopted in 2015, but we began our work in 2013. Yes, it became easier because there were much more data open finally. And for today, the portal of data.gov.ua is just a treasury. The creative developer can, during half of the day, he can think of some new project. I haven't been there for several months, but still, just to understand what's changed, I would spend only a week to understand it, so this is the positive change. Okay, still, I'd like to focus upon the usage of the open data and about the access to them, because still, there are lots of data which are needed by the developers. They are not published on the portal, and it has to be taken out of several 5 state enterprises from some registers which are sometimes not interconnected with data.gov.ua or publish the data not so regularly. What can you tell about that? Now we are writing emails to the tax inspection for them to normalize the data they're publishing, because the current quality is not satisfactory. They don't have the codes with the help of which you can understand what company that is, and unfortunately the titles could be cut and or shortened. It's very difficult to work with those registers. For some of our requests they do react and they try to improve the quality of the data, and some of them they just ignore because they just speak about the law and they say that we don't owe anyone. Okay, still I'd like to ask Tetyana about the access to the data of different commercial structures. I remember that we were speaking about that a lot, and just now, having the parallel universe, the law of the open data, in our reality we're having lots of treaties which are already signed at the commercial companies with the ministries and state companies, so they have the problem. They don't have the problem of open data at all because they have some of the exclusive attitude and relationship. So when we cooperated with US for the Ministry of Infrastructure, we had certain questions about that too. How it seems to you? How does it seem as for the access and the problem of the access of the commercial companies to these data? Do we have it? And maybe we have certain stipulations about that. Well, I'd like to say that, first of all, this problem is not only in Ukraine. It could be a big plus, because there are lots of services, the YouControl and the which are widely known among all of the people, and the data about the Ukrainian companies which we don't have in the open access. For instance, the financial reports of the company. We know that this is the closed information. I consider it not to be right because it's wrong, because in the UK it's an open information and nobody still died because of that. So we need to do that. We need to open it. So still, this information is closed, and the market offers lots of options, beginning with a subscription for some service, and I heard that there was the price of $1,000 for Form 1 and Form 2, which the tax inspection Kel gave. That is why this problem exists. Is it good or bad? I have an activist acquainted. She always said, is corruption always bad? For instance, we are paying a bribe for a person to get away from the country where there is a certain threat. It's not understandable whether this corruption is good or bad. So if this information will help to find out about some of the corruption crime, but it's good. But on the other hand, we as a company which has to be subordinate to the international anti-corruption law legislation, we can't use the information if we don't see the sources of this information. We don't understand where this information emerged from. For instance, I don't know. I didn't see a single exclusive treaty between the business and the state. Maybe this treaty exists, and maybe those databases are existing and sold somewhere at Petrivka market. I don't know. Unfortunately, it's a great problem, and it's on the world level. We need to speak about that. It's a fact. I'd like to add at least a couple of facts. I haven't seen a single treaty still either, but still we have a certain experience as for the issue of DataGov.ua portal. When we developed it in 2013, we had to fill it in with something. So to fill it in, we gathered the volunteers who helped to get some of the data, the registers, to have 100 of the test data sets. So each of them gained these data with all the truths and faults, and I didn't like some of the ways how they gathered this information, because I know that these data were not open access, but still the person got it from some ministry or state enterprise. Yes, it was for the good, because the portal will show how it can act. And later on it can be used when you clean this data, so it will be filled with relevant information. Do you have, Sergiy, any of such situations, similar situations, which would be vague, when sometimes the state institutions don't want to publish this information, but they are ready to cooperate with you or your clients under some conditions. I already mentioned that we didn't have the proper work process with the administrators of those registers, and everything we are doing is the constant monitoring of the appearance of new open data on different sites and different resources. First of all, data.gov.ua, of course, because for today it's the biggest consolidator of those data sets. There is no point in that, the thing you are mentioning now, because it's not a long-term model. It won't guarantee the result, but it's still very high risk. Part of the information, well, I've already told, it was sent to us. Not all of the information which was sent to us was used, because if we couldn't check the verification of this information, we couldn't use this data. So I wouldn't recommend to get this, to get such approaches in this system, some of the contracts with the state officials. It's a very short-term approach. Okay, thanks. Ihor, I'd like to mention about you too, but maybe not about the data which has been generated by the OTP bank, but about the satisfaction by the bank of those data which is being opened by National Bank of Ukraine. As you are the representative of the banking system, at the same time you are the user and the company which gives this data so-called above. And how useful is it? And did it touch you in this or that way? Do you have any profit that this data became open? Hello. First of all, I'd like to say that National Bank of Ukraine is really a locomotive of the changes and transformations. And really, those tendencies it shows, they help the open data and open banking compatibility. These data, which are open at the NBU, National Bank of Ukraine, in the framework of the FinTech booster, which is planned by OTP Bank together with NBU, will be researched. Those interfaces and the data which would be interesting for the bank. Still, the program itself, FinTech Booster, is an rather innovative, and it solves the questions of certain business questions. If we speak about the open data which is being used by OTP Bank, of course these are the data which deal with the e-data which deals with KYC procedures. But what is now showed by the business departments is sometimes not enough. It's not in the full scale. And the frequency. Because the data about the end beneficiaries and the share of the ownership sometimes is not opened by some of the clients. And one of the problems which has to be solved by the FinTech Booster program is the search of the solutions in the RegTech format, which is similar to the open chatbots, which will be searching the necessary data. Okay, we'll come back to this program again, but I'd like to come back to Tetyana about the sufficiency or maybe the lack of the data which are existing today for your forensics department. Maybe we need to put YouControl, install YouControl, and it would be enough for the needs of your trend, or for the forensics to work, we need something more. Well, yes, unfortunately, it's not enough. We don't have enough data. If you want to have any information, new information in Ukraine, You can gain it, but not always that openly. But as for the open data, as for the filling it, it's of course it's not enough for our department. And the financial reports, I'm sorry for getting back to this topic, but it's really very important about the legal entity. So if I could analyze it and to see it from the point of view of the counter-agent, what the company is, if it has any tenders, does it have any turnover at all, what's the background of this company, whether it will be able to perform this work, this data is not enough, of course. It would be useful, but unfortunately I have to mention it again, lots of resources prepare these data, so we need to open it 100%. And also we have the international resource which offers information about the Ukrainian companies. There is some interesting analytics which could be implemented by our suppliers at their places. For instance, the address of the mass registration. There is the register of the addresses of mass registration. I'm not sure that it's so full, that it's being filled in time. But if this analytics had been held according to the databases, it would be really cool. Especially as for the mass phone numbers, mass shareholders and directors. It's a 100% sign of the fake company. Okay. Nice, thank you. Ihor, I know that you've gotten a certain understanding how the corporate bank data can be used. Could you tell about that in more details? What are the plans, how you see that? And open banking standards and so on. Yes, it seems to me that open banking is the search of the new form of cooperation of the client, the bank, and other people, other third parties. But still, we need to understand that implementing the standards of open banking and open data, it will lead to the changes of the operational model of the bank itself, and maybe in the future, the change of the business model of the bank. Why? What open banking is, essentially, and how it's working. Open banking is the platform which has the interfaces, which is publicly accessible for the bank from the behalf of the bank, and any companies and clients can use these interfaces to get open data which the bank has to solve certain questions. The developers offering their applications which will solve the client's questions, they will look at this data and build their internal processes knowing these data. So this rebuild of this model and orientation for the open data from the bank will lead to the change of the operational model of the business, and we are coming back to the question, if the banks open the data, how much they should open it, what should be the volume, and which data. Because we've got certain limitations between the opening of the data and connection of the commercial data, which can be opened, and the public data, which can be opened. Still, this market needs to be understood through the legislation documents. This is the work of the National Bank, including for the banking system to understand how much the banks can be open for the clients. And on the other hand, how much the clients are ready to be open in the external market. This is the question of a certain culture which has been must be created in the society, and the trust towards the data, and some of the questions asked as for the transition into digital channels. Okay, from my own behalf, I'd like to add that for today, lots of enterprises are opening their own data if only technological companies did it before. Today we have certain standards according to which corporate data is being opened. This is the very big scale event, which is in Europe, has the whole volume of a separate market, because the companies strive to diversify the certain risks connected with the development of certain new projects and products, and to put this responsibility onto startups. Why this model works in Europe, and I think it will work in Ukraine too, because the corporate data in comparison with the state data is gathered really precisely in a structured way. They have higher quality, and they always attracted a bigger amount of money to gain these databases and to store it. So we have something to speak about here. So the market of open data is rather substantial now. Sergiy. The logical next question is as follows. OTP Bank opens the data, for instance. How will YouControl work later on? Are you planning to work with the commercial organizations which have data about the companies, about the people? Do you need it? Does your service need it really? If this data is officially published, of course it will be interesting for us. The only thing is not to cross the line when we have personal data and it can pose a certain threat for a person, and the data which are, for instance, in the aggregated state can be used for the analysis and finding the frauds. We do know that there are certain services existing which gather the story of your Google searches, of any other searches and activities, and knowing this information, they're making a conclusion whether a person is a fraud or not. They create a psychological portrait out of that. Formally, this data is personal and closed. They don't public it, but they create a product which is really helping both for the bankers to minimize their losses and not to cooperate with the frauds. So if I answer shortly, yes, the data is interesting, but it's very important for it to be legal. But still, the experience with the corporate data, does YouControl have any of this experience? Maybe some data from the state companies, not from the commercial. No, YouControl doesn't, but I do. I have, because for lots of years I've been working as director of the logistic company, and undoubtedly I analyzed the internal information more, and I analyzed the clients and the risks of the work with the clients, knowing the history of the work with them, when they had the delays in the payments and so on. Of course, it was not the full-scale scoring, and it didn't give us the high-quality results. Without the external information, it's impossible to work in a proper way. Okay, thank you. The question, which is a commercial one, and I think that everyone was interested in that, the people who are not connected to the state sector, how much money can be earned by the usage of open data. Today we understand that there are certain methods which sometimes are not that legal, how to gain data, and it means that certain state officials can earn money if they don't publish this data. It concerns the state enterprises, which we had to face as the public organization. We know that they can be gathered, it can be opened, but still it's not open because it's much easier to give it on the flash drives or to create an API which is open but not for everyone. Still, nevertheless, we have a certain figure about the corporate data in Europe. Almost $500 million is the market for today. As for the Ukrainian market, how do you, Sergiy, assess the quantity of money which the Ukrainian companies can earn? Maybe on the example of your company, maybe any other organizations which are using open data and earning money. If we speak about our example, we're still a very small company with a small turnover, and we are the company which has recently been a startup. Still, in 3 years we were able to pay off We created a good collective. We have several dozens of people working in our team, and we have the market level salaries. We developed, we grew, so we can unstoppably improve the system. So of course I will make a certain propaganda to create the open data products, which has a nice perspective, which is if people say that open data is gold, they just decrease the price of open data. It's much more expensive. It's El Dorado we have to deal with. I always say that data.gov.ua is a treasury if you have a creative approach to those data sets. So knowing the tempos of the development of the fintech booster, Ihor, what do you think about the perspectives of this trend as the fintech in this or that way is really interconnected with the bank data? And for sure it has data which are open and it has startups. How do you think, how do you feel, what are the levels of these products and how can they grow? Really, knowing the business departments, there are certain ideas how to solve these or those tasks. And what we finally have as a conclusion, when you are inside of the bank, it's very difficult to find a certain flexible, good, scaled idea for smaller or even bigger tasks. Consequently, the aims, the tasks of the fintech booster OTP Bank is planning to issue, together with Incubator 1991, it gives the business that additional channel with the help of which you can solve your problems. And the startups, which can give the solution connected with the fintech, they will be able seeing the live tasks and to test the cases and to look whether their prototypes and their ideas are correspondent to the requirements of the business. What I faced analyzing the market, that it was really complicated to find the target audience from the startups which would solve the matters of the bank. There are lots of questions are solved by the state, agrarian sphere, but still in the banking sector, those solutions were not enough at the Ukrainian market. So one of the tasks of the program of FinTech Booster is to show that banks have problems too, and the startups can solve them. The result of this program will be the implementation of the solution of the product or of the service which will be suggested by the startup into the corporate banking infrastructure. Well, in fact, you are inviting to the program, right? Yes, that's what I do. That's a short advertisement. Okay. I would like to mention several figures. We, as the public organization, 1991 Open Data Incubator, we don't have an understanding of the whole open data market in Ukraine, but we have an understanding of how the financial affairs at the startups we are issuing. During the previous year, we've issued 50 startups, which for a year and a half, in fact, 50 startups which altogether raised more than $500,000. Those are the investments, both commercial from the venture investors and angels. Those are grant money which they managed to raise, and the approximate division is 40% of the projects we issued raised the money, and the division, overall division of the fund they raised during this year and a half was about 50-50 between the grants and the commercial investments. In fact, if we divide it into the quantity of the projects which raised the money, the average investment is from $30,000 to $50,000, which can be compared with the venture capital investments. So the startups which are highly estimated as assessed by the investors. This is the first example you can try to implement. The fact that the Ukrainian startups are getting this kind of money, it's of course a big success for us. It means that there is money for such projects. And as far as I know, in the United States, the situation with an open data startups is a bit different. One of my acquaintances and one of my familiar startups is in New York. It has the name of 2 Sigma. It's the fintech startup which uses open state data and open corporate data from the financial sector of American companies. For today, they are working with 2 million of gigabyte of information and give the solution where to invest money better. They're working in the private investment and wealth management sphere. It seems to me that Ukraine can't have any similar projects because we don't have so much data. But what Ihor has already mentioned, open banking standard is somewhere here and it will happen soon. And maybe Tetyana knows any of the big projects which are used in forensic and which use the data to get the right response. In fact, besides the services and control which are gathering information and help for the 20 sources, we've got some other services, international services, which show the data from country to the country, and we use them too, both on the level of the whole world. And I do know that in the intelligence of CIA and so on, they have more serious toolkit. They have a very serious approach to the analysis of information. They automatically analyze it. So, for instance, the system can automatically find the terroristic act. Unfortunately, we don't have those many resources because they're really expensive. In fact, I know that some of the companies have their own developments. I communicated with Reuters. They have their own system of visualization of data, and they showed it to me how they do that at their editor's office and all of the oligarchs, for instance, and how it all is worked up to the certain separate banking accounts. Yes, there are certain IBM I2 services which helps us. Well, unfortunately, this is not open data, but it helps to have some of the open data as the visualization. We are working on that too, because very often you can find the frauds after visualization of the information. It's more than enough. If you have a certain database, you can't do it, but if you visualize it, you can see it. Yes, we deal with that. And also, to sum it up, I'd like to say that we have several services, not even services, but startups, which use in Ukraine open data, and they function. First of all, it's the company which is well known. It's Andriy. It uses the spectral camera for the drone to estimate the temperature and humidity of the soil. And they use the data of the Ministry of Agrarian Policy about the agrarian chemistry passports of the agrarian passports. So they take the applications for the farmers. They had additional acceleration in New York, and now they're getting ready for the next service option. Besides, they had the project Novizor, which does the opposite. It gets the data from the cell phones and gives this data to the Ministry of Infrastructure. How many times the cell phone jumped in this or that car, and basing on this information, they make some decisions on the repairments or maintenance of the roads. And still we're having the service which is being developed now. As for the digital police and the mapping or messaging, if you found out yourself in some dangerous part of the city. It seems to me there will be more and more of such services, and both the Ukrainian user and the business will pay more for that. You will see more open data startups a bit later today, but before it begins, we are ready to take a couple of questions. So maybe there will be a microphone now, right? There's the microphone, it's been turned on. Thank you for such a story. It's really inspiring, but this is the question I have. It seems to me that very often you're using not the open data, but public data. How legal it is to use it in the commercial activities, and how do you ensure yourself in the judicial part? Would you please introduce yourself and tell us whom you address this question? My name is Ivan, I'm an architect, but I deal with open data in the sphere of city planning. So I use... Maybe the question is, first of all, for Sergiy. Thank you for this question. As I mentioned, there is open information and confidential information, and there is commercial information. We are using open information only. Otherwise, we'd have some visits from the law enforcement, especially knowing the situation which happened with the company in March. And our activity is really closely monitored and rechecked. Can I comment a bit too, because I know it. As for the responsibility of the commercial sector, we've got the international anti-corruption legislation, which is much more strict than the Ukrainian one, so it's dealt with lots of companies in Ukraine. The problem is that if I pay for the services of the company, which maybe will pay the bribe, and I can guess about that because I know that this data is not in the open access, not in the open sources, it means that I will be responsible according to this legislation. It could be FCPA, maybe you heard about that. The companies are paying enormous fines. Wimpelcom paid $800 million because there was a bribe in Uzbekistan. But they just, it was not a direct bribe, they just paid for the consulting company. It's really serious. And this is what business has to be responsible for. He should think which data he's buying, and using. At the same time, there was not a single fact of sanctions or punishment for usage. No, if we analyze the register, there are certain cases with physical. If someone stole the flash drive and sold it anywhere, he is the fraud. This is the most popular case because it's much easier to catch it, because the system can analyze the downloading of the data, and then at the exit the person can be caught. Are there any other questions left? Okay, perfect. Then I'd like to thank all of the participants of this panel discussion, and thank you so much to you. We are getting close to the moderator and the next section. Thank you.